Welcome everybody. Today we will be speaking about instrumentation and Kibana. I guess the title of this presentation is not very self-descriptive, so I hope you read the description of the session. We will be talking about instrumentation, Kibana, Elasticsearch, cloud, a little bit of multi-tenancy as well. Last year I came here to talk about multi-tenancy and cloud solutions. And we will take a very quick look at what multi-tenancy and cloud is, but in case you have further questions, please, I encourage you to watch the presentation from last year. Also, disclaimer, I'm not an Elasticsearch or Kibana expert. I think there's a guy from Elastic in another room talking about Elasticsearch and other features. I'm just going to talk about how we use Kibana and Elasticsearch and NetSuite and in feature instrumentation in general. So I'm happy to answer any questions about Elasticsearch, but I may not be the expert that you are looking for. Okay. So quick introduction. Well, I'm A.Margarit. I work as a senior software engineer at Oracle NetSuite. Last year I came here as a manager for NetSuite, but in a year we've been acquired by Oracle. And my title also changed. This is my awesome team from Barcelona. And before we start, how many of you have fallen asleep anytime in a cinema? Because honestly, when I was before in one of the presentations, I was falling asleep, not because of the presenter, but I think lights and the cinema is just making me fall asleep. So in case if you are falling asleep, let me know because I bought some Red Bulls to wake you up, okay? All right, so what are the goals of this presentation? So we want to understand the challenges of feature lifecycle, especially in multi-tenant applications, explore how these awesome tools, Elasticsearch and Kibana, can help us in feature instrumentation. We will talk about being proactive or being reactive against software development, and we will share our experience at NetSuite. Again, this is not that super technical talk. I think it's a more philosophical talk. I hope you guys don't mind. I really like philosophical talks that make you think, and I hope I can achieve that with this presentation. So very quickly through the agenda, so we'll have a background to explain multi-tenancy, to explain feature instrumentation, to explain what tools we are going to be using, Kibana and Elasticsearch. We'll talk about the challenges when designing features in a multi-tenant system, how feature instrumentation can help us, and finally, what we do in NetSuite with respect to this topic. So first of all, what is a multi-tenant system? So I put this picture on purpose. I hope you get the analogy, but in case you don't. So to me, this represents a multi-tenant system. We have a single box. We have fruits that look the same. Some of them are similar, but some of them are different. But even though they are in the same box, they have very clear boundaries, right? We have one system, multiple tenants, and each of the tenants are separate, right? Same space, but different tenants. So this is to me what multi-tenancy is, and that's the definition. So multi-tenancy refers to software architecture. This is an architecture which a single instance of software, a single system, can run several tenants, systems, and configurations, okay? So if you see this diagram, if you take a look at the diagram, we have a single system, a single architecture, and then we have two tenants running on the same architecture with the same application layer, the same database, all within the same server. But each of these tenants has its own data, configuration, and customizations, right? This is not the same as a multi-user system, right? This is not like saying I have my Gmail account and Gmail is multi-tenant because I have my account and you have your account. This is about more oriented to line of business and the things that we can do on top of the system, so we can customize it, we can add code into that system, and the system will be able to manage code from tenant 1 or tenant 2, and so on, okay? So don't confuse them with Facebook. Is Facebook multi-tenant? Well, what is a tenant at Facebook? Tenant is not a user, okay? Last year I also did the analogy with roommates, so I think multi-tenancy is very similar to a group of friends that share a flat, share electricity, share the gas, pay the bills between them, but they only have one flat. And each of them have their own room, and hopefully you don't get people to access your room. So what is the difference? Well, we have a lot of merchants and companies doing single-tenant architectures, and I would represent them like this. So we have different tenants, different deployments. As you can see, the colors are slightly different because you may end up doing some customizations for one tenant, even though you don't want to do that. But there's always the point where you say, yeah, we need something for this tenant. Okay, let's just change the application layer for this one, and that's all. And at the end, you end up with multiple versions of the same system, right? Whereas here, that's not possible to do. And then, there are different approaches to solve this. We will not get into the details, though. So what are the characteristics of multi-tenancy? So highly customizable, as I mentioned, UI, data model. You want to be able to extend your records, your properties, your entities of the system. Your customer for tenant 1 may not have the same properties as customer for tenant 2, right? We also want to change the workflows, be able to provide integrations with other systems. An example could be I have an e-commerce, which is a multi-tenant, let's say I use Shopify, something like that. I would like to, for example, authorize a credit card before I capture the order, before I enter the order into my system. Another tenant may want to do something completely different and may prefer to capture the order first and then authorize asynchronously. Those are types of workflows that should be supported by a single system, even though it's used by multiple tenants. It's very complex to develop functionally and technically. I can speak from my experience. We will see later on why I think that it's complex. And the key benefit of multi-tenancy, I guess, that's the reason why we do this, is because we can share IT resources, it's cheaper, and it's more efficient, right? If we have 30,000 customers and we have to deploy 30,000 systems or deployments, that's not going to scale. We have some logos here from some multi-tenant companies. It's quite hard to get which companies are multi-tenant because this is about architecture and not so much about what companies sell. But I'm pretty sure these ones are multi-tenant. All right. So what is Elasticsearch? I didn't want to explain what is Elasticsearch because it's a quite complex thing to do. So I thought it would be great to put one video from Elastic that explains what Elasticsearch is. It's going to take just 1 minute. If it wants to start. Oh.
I mean...
Oh, good question.
It's a very difficult question.
I guess, what I usually tell people is that Elasticsearch is a, search index.
It's search, Just search. Just search.
Well, a giant index engine.
Powerful analytics database.
Just like a magic box.
Elasticsearch is kind of like a database and a search engine on steroids.
But it is just ridiculously easy to get it up and running and doing useful stuff.
It's a technology that allows you to implement a solution when you've got more data than you know what to do with.
Searching for big data really fast.
It's like your own in-house Google, really.
Yeah, that's a good analogy, yeah.
It's a search engine.
So it's like a big Google, right? So that will be the definition. So Elasticsearch is a search engine with database repository where we can do a lot of things in there. I guess if you are familiar with Elasticsearch or have used with Elasticsearch, okay. So I don't need to go into details. So we could think of about Elasticsearch this way. We have a cluster with several nodes. Each of the nodes can contain parts or whole indexes. We have one index there, index 1, which is shared across two nodes, and where we have a couple of shards that contain that data. So that means that when we query index 1, all we are doing is perform two queries, one in shard 1, one in shard 2, and then aggregate the results and return them, okay? So we have cluster nodes, indexes, shards, and each of the shards is a Lucene index, in case you are familiar with Lucene. So these are the examples and use cases that we can use Elasticsearch for, from the very deep inside of our application, logging, into the more consumer-facing, like searching for items in a web store, in an e-commerce, or something like that. In this presentation, we will focus on the logging and analytics part. I don't know what. So what is Kibana? Kibana is just one screenshot. This is Kibana. It's a great tool for visualization, so we can visualize the data that we have in Elasticsearch. At the end, Elasticsearch is great, but we only have documents and stuff like that later on we can visualize here. So what is instrumentation? Remember that we are in the background. I will get to the core of the presentation in a few. So instrumentation refers to the ability to monitor or measure the level of product performance, errors, and so on, okay? So what I want you to get from here is that instrumentation is about adding instructions into our code to monitor stuff, right? So this is a very simple example of JavaScript. I'm sure that all of you guys, or if you have been using JavaScript, you have done this at some point, doing some console logs. This stuff gets into the console, and then you take a look at what's in there, and then you forget about what you logged. Same thing in Java, printing stuff, that helps us to know what's going on in the product. And then something a little sophisticated where what we log is not lost in a console or anything like that, but instead is persisted somewhere. So this could be, for example, an example of enterprise instrumentation where within a process, in this case, safeguard, we are storing properties like the time that we spent, transaction, how many lines were in the cart, how many promotions were applied, and how time did we spend in the payment gateway. So regarding instrumentation types, we have mainly 4 instrumentation types, so 4 things that we normally instrument. Profiling, and this is probably something that our friends from New Relic are doing very well. We can also do error logging, data logging, and performance counters. If we look at the previous example, we were doing some data logging, storing how many lines the card had, how many promotions, and as well some performance counters since we were storing timings of the process. Error logging is obvious, I guess. So we've seen what multi-tenancy is. We've seen also what Elasticsearch and Kibana are. And what I would like, and feature instrumentation. And what I would like to get now is what are the challenges that we have in multi-tenant solutions. And later on, we will see how feature instrumentation with Elasticsearch can help us. So I would like to, sorry, I will make you read now, but I would like you to go through this, and I would like to know how many of you feel, how recognize this pattern. So you release something into production, and then you get some problems, unexpected problems related to performance, for example, or your product manager every once in a while, calls you to his desk and say, hey, can you get me some data from production? I just want to know how many customers are doing this or that. Or some of you may think that there are some processes in production that are not working very well, but you don't have data or time to check. Also, this is very common. Like a company stores hundreds of thousands of logs every day, but who goes through them? Nobody, right? And who's going to check if something is wrong in those logs? Well, when the customer calls, we will go through the logs, and then we will see what happened, right? Also, we have, if you are using user experience practices in your teams, you may have UX people constantly asking you, okay, do you know how users actually use the system? Because we make a lot of assumptions, right? We never know. We are never in front of the user looking at how are doing stuff in the application. So all of these problems are problems that we face normally, and that most of the times we don't have good solutions for, okay? How many of you do you feel recognized with these situations? Okay, but majority, that's good. Okay. So in this case, in a multi-tenant architecture, by the way, how many of you use a multi-tenant architecture? Ooh, not many. How many of you do software as a service? Okay. Anybody doing software as a service without multi-tenancy? Doing virtualization? Come on, you can tell me. Okay. So when we develop stuff in a multi-tenant architecture, as we said, we have a single system that serves multiple tenants. The first problem that we face is that we get requirements from tenants that are completely different, right? They want the same functionality, but they want different things. So that is a complex thing to do. And this goes back to the previous statement of doing multi-tenancy features is complex. It's complex functionally because you need to know exactly what customers want and how to make that customizable and configurable. And it's also challenging technically, right? It's challenging technically because if we allow tenants to customize the application, and then we are adding features, how do we know that our features are not blocking with the customizations and so on? Also, it's very challenging technically because related to performance, we cannot basically release something where tenant 1 is going to use so many resources of the system that tenant 2 is going to be suffering from that, right? So imagine that tenant 1 is uploading a file and using 80% of the power of the system, and then tenant 2 is trying to get requests, but those requests are not going through because the system is too busy doing stuff for tenant 1. So that is tough and complex, and that's something that we normally have to keep in mind when developing applications. And obviously security. We cannot leak data from one to another, and that's something that we have to keep in mind. Especially this becomes very difficult if, like in our case, you have 30,000 tenants, right? So that means that each of these 30,000 may have different requirements, different performance expectations, different volumes, and so on. This becomes very challenging. So what are the challenges? Well, again, requirements gathering is very complex. Designing is very complex. We don't have enough information to know what our customers want. In terms of requirements as well, we cannot talk to 30,000 customers. It's practically impossible. And we need still to know what to develop. So we need to get some insight from them. Testing and developing is complex. We want to test things up front. So when we put a feature in production, we know that it's not going to break for a small subset of those 30,000 customers. And finally, one of the challenges that we have is that we put things into production, but then we cannot monitor that, right? We are missing data points. Not all features are well instrumented, and that means that we are blindly putting stuff into production. So imagine 30,000 customers having the ability to turn on a feature and not knowing what's going to happen. Okay. Oh. Cool. So here's where we get to reactive versus proactive, right? So what do I mean by reactive? Well, by reactive, I mean companies that do not care about that. We care about releasing stuff and releasing the next feature and the next feature and the next feature and so on. So what we end up is having lack of information. We don't know what's going on in production, and maybe we don't care. And that means that when we have a problem as well, we are going to spend hours trying to find the problem because we are missing a lot of data. If we are capturing data, okay, we are one of these companies that store hundreds of thousands of logs, but then we put them somewhere where it's not queryable, where we cannot report, and basically where we cannot access this data, right? And the last one is that sometimes companies just rely on the fact that somebody will complain. So instead of proactively going and checking if anything is going wrong, we just sit back and wait, and then the customer calls support. They are super upset, but we are developers. We don't talk to customers, right? So it's okay. It's fine. Some of us. So this is what I mean by reactive. Just waiting for problems to happen, not having structured data, not having data points, or maybe not having the data accessible. Maybe only DevOps is accessible to that data and you have no clue that this data exists, right? That's really not being very proactive about what's going on in your system, especially if you're a cloud system. If you're an on-premise system, that may be a little bit more tricky to do. So that's why feature instrumentation can help us here, right? What do I mean by feature instrumentation? Well, in a multi-tenant architecture, we have a unique position to capture everything that happens through our system, right? We have all tenants in the same architecture, and we can just be capturing logs of every single tenant and putting that information somewhere for further analysis, right? So in this case, we have our architecture, and in the application layer, we are capturing errors, data, and performance counters. I'm pretty sure that most of you do error logging. I mean, that's the minimum. But I don't think many of us, I don't think many of us are doing data logging, behavioral logging, right? So like stuff that we see here, like if we can. So, how many lines does this card have? Or what was the payment? Was it Visa? Did it take longer because it was Visa over MasterCard? Stuff like that. These type of questions are the questions that typically we don't answer through data. We answer through feelings, customer calls, issues. But wouldn't that be cool just to, to check that data? This is an example of an error. I think we are all doing this, or I hope so. And also performance counters like we have, we see here like the payment time span or the total span. It's really important to mix these two in our case, because then we can get to know trends and patterns, related to data and performance. So we know, for instance, that when we have a lot of lines in a card, the saving is going to take longer. And we can predict, those numbers over time. Okay. Is it my computer? Maybe. I'm sorry about that, guys. Okay. So very simple, right? We've been talking about Elasticsearch, Kibana. So at the end, the nirvana state, I guess, it's to have this multi-tenant system, capturing everything that happens through it, putting that in Elasticsearch, and then having every team, and here is very important, every team, all roles, PMs, anybody, just watching the dashboards, because that's really the goal of this, right? We want every role to know what's going on in production. And this is key, because if we say that the data is only accessible by developers, then we will be, bothered every time to get that data. And that's not what we want. What we want is that anybody in the team is independent and can go and explore and discover trends and patterns. So if we look at the challenges that we had before, I put here some roles and some things that we can do with that data. If we have proper feature instrumentation in place, we can have our PM defining new metrics and exploring. And that's the cool part, defining, right? Because when we think about logging, we think about us developers going into the code and saying, okay, I'm going to log this, I'm going to log that. PM just, doesn't care about what I'm logging. But the reality is that the PM really needs to care about what we are logging, because it should be the PM that should say, hey, can you please put, these properties in the logs, so later on I can go to Kibana and I can do my dashboard with those metrics, and that's key, right? When we are designing stuff, developers, UX, we can go to Kibana, we can explore, okay, how many customers are using this functionality? How many are using that other functionality? Should we care about this 2% that, that this feature will be incompatible with? We don't care, okay. That's gonna give us this answer, right? Testing, developing, we can test things in pre-production and we can get the same reports that we will get in production. And that's how we can measure performance properly, right? And then Nirvana state, having all of us, all team, just monitoring and watching. And here's where we say, keep calm and watch Kibana, right? Because at the end, what is that the team is owning this functionality. All right, why Elasticsearch and Kibana? Well, it's easy to get up and running, and that's obvious. I guess whoever has been using Elasticsearch in this room will know that. It's scalable and highly available. It's impressive how you can run a query and go through over hundreds of thousands of data and just get the results immediately. And on top of that, you don't need to be indexing stuff, right? It's not like Oracle. Okay, I need to think about. Sorry, I work at Oracle. It's not like SQL Server where you have to think about which columns I want to index up front so my query can run fast, right? It's built on Lucene, first-class full text, search capabilities, schema-free. That's very important. If we want to allow feature instrumentation without any friction, we need a way that our data, and we don't need to be worrying about schema, about migrations, and so on, right? We can get notifications through Watcher. We can aggregate data to keep it forever. And Kibana is just awesome. Anybody can use Kibana. So what do we do in NetSuite? This is our vision, and this is how we started this process. Our vision, so at some point in the past, we realized that we were missing a lot of data. And we started with these 4 building blocks, right? We wanted our teams to be empowered, and that means we don't need to be building one feature, delivering, then getting the new feature, delivering again, and just forget about the rest, because that's not how it works. We should be empowered to know what happens since our feature is designed until it's developed, and then what happens later. How is the feature being used in production? We also wanted to be proactive. So imagine we have 30,000 customers on NetSuite, single system. You cannot imagine the amount of issues that we get, and we just wanted to be proactive. Okay, we wanted to know when something was not going well and react on that before the customer actually calls us. Especially when we do, critical processing. Like we are an ERP, and we cannot say, yeah, sorry, we stopped processing transactions today for a couple of hours. I'm sorry you realized about that. We cannot afford that. Also, we want to have data-driven designs, no longer feeling-driven designs. Like, I think that our customers, what they really want is something like this. Because I think that they use a lot this functionality. Okay, how do you know? How can we know? So this is key, right? And the last thing, and that's the thing that I stressed earlier, we should have all full visibility of what's going on in production. Not only DevOps, not only devs, everybody, right? So how do we accomplish this vision in NetSuite? So we have, again, 4 building blocks, defining metrics, and that's something that we should be able to do very quickly. And when I say quickly, it means very quickly. So we should not be thinking about, okay, I need to define a schema, or I need to define a table, or I need to define an index, or I need to define a type. We have a mechanism to be able to log anything. And we will put that into Elasticsearch, and we will be able to consume that later. We should be able to store the data forever. That's another thing, I'm a DevOps guy, and I say, sorry, man, but I cannot keep your data forever. So what I'm going to do is every 3 months, I'm going to wipe out all the data. I'm sure that this has happened in your company. So one of the pillars of our vision was to summarize the data. Say, I want to summarize this data daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, anything that is relevant to me. So next year, when I'm looking at the reports, I can say, okay, that Black Friday from last year, did we get the same performance or the same throughput as this year? And I should be able to get those numbers. Dashboards, that's an obvious one. And the last one is notifications. We should be able to get notifications. It's impractical to have somebody there exploring and doing stuff, right? So this is how we structure our vision. And I'm sure that you guys would like to know what is in this blue box, but I cannot give you more details. But I'm giving you all the ingredients to build your own. So we have an application layer API where we can define metrics, again, low friction, no schema required, where we can define summarization expressions. So we can say, I want to summarize my data daily, and this is how I want to summarize that. And as well, we can define notifications. So I'm defining my data points, I'm defining how I want to store them, and I'm defining what I want to be notified on if it happens, right? We are using Elasticsearch in there to store all these logs, and believe me, we have a lot of information in there. And lastly, we have Kibana as our main tool for visualization. So anybody in the team can access that data, okay? This is a real dashboard from one of our offices in Brno. And yeah, we are logging here stuff related to e-commerce. Watchers, that's another very cool stuff that Elasticsearch provides. So here's how you can define your notifications. This is a feature that Elasticsearch put in place very recently. And also Elasticsearch allows you the ability to create aggregations. So last, a quick recap, and then we go into questions. So this presentation was about explaining to you guys how you can empower your teams to, to keep an eye in production, to own what we are really delivering, and not just releasing and forgetting. Being proactive over reactive. I hope this is helpful for you anytime, when you think about something that you are doing and you think about this, am I being proactive or just reactive, right? Metrics, summarizations, dashboards, and notifications can help you to get there, to be proactive. And these awesome tools, Elasticsearch and Kibana, that if you have any questions, I think there is a guy from Elastic here around. But yeah, are great tools to use. Okay, so thank you very much, and I'm open for any questions. There's one that I can barely see.
Hi, one question.
I don't know where you are, sorry. I don't know
Here,
where to look.
I'm here.
I will listen.
Hello?
Yeah.
Hi.
There you are. Sorry, you are right in the light. Like
Yeah. And one question, what would you do if you want to have like a complex alert system based on the graphs that you have in Kibana? Did you solve this problem, or do you know if there is a way to do this? Because you have alerts, but based on your application layer, and there you don't have a lot of aggregation of the data. And also you have some watchers in Elasticsearch, but I don't know if it's complex enough.
Right, so our notifications are based on data that we have in Elasticsearch, right? So it's not really at the application layer we allow to define those notifications, which basically at the end are watchers that we create in Elasticsearch. But we don't, the application layer is just an abstraction to get those notification definitions in Elasticsearch. Did I answer your question, more or less? Sorry, I have to put my hand here.
No, yeah, that the question if you knew a way of having alerts in the Kibana layer, where you can have like more complex alerts, like for example, a merchant is not doing enough transactions for some reason, or their transactions are failing, so you can have like more detailed alerts.
No, sorry, I'm not infrastructure, but that's what we use. I believe we use Watcher, and I don't know the exact details of that. We can discuss afterwards.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, how are you? So thanks for the talk. I have a couple of, just one question really. It's not a technical question.
Okay.
It's more of about your approach. So how do you do analysis and trending when some of the pieces of data are protected by law, for example, where you can't lock the IP address in Germany, or you can't lock this stuff in this other country? Like, is there a way to still get the value of those analytics without breaking any regulations?
That's a very good question. When we discussed about this project with security, the first thing that was obvious is that we cannot store any personal information here, the PII information, so we are not allowed to store anything that would break any law. Now, I'm not sure if we are complying with all the regulations. I assume so. but we don't have a defined strategy for that, to be honest. Okay.
No, I don't.
All right. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.